we are becoming an anti-Christian society. People have lost their jobs for saying that. And he said, the thing is, Tim, you're coming across this from a particular worldview. And I went straight back with, so are you. I think churches need to make sure they're teaching about these issues. We need people with moral courage, and it doesn't take that many to change a nation.
So we often observe the culture wars from a distance. Headlines, debates, social media, storms, all this kind of thing. But what happens when you're right in the middle of it, day after day? Today, I'm joined by Tim Dieppe, Head of Public Policy from Christian Concern. And today we're going to move past the abstract politics to the real human stories, the legal battles, the implications of that, and why, despite the cost, many believe this fight is fundamentally worth it. Tim, great to have you, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Great pleasure. Look forward to it.
So yeah, firstly, Tim, can you explain to us what do you do here at Christian Concern as head of policy, and what is it that Christian Concern is dealing with day to day?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Luke. I'm head of public policy here. I've been here 10 years now. I oversee our work on Islam, which I try and retain a specialist interest in. I've written a couple of books on Islam, but also on LGBT, sexual ethics more generally, education, sex, secularism, and also abortion and assisted suicide as well. So we respond to consultations on all of those kind of things. We write up articles and do interviews in the media, trying to present a Christian perspective, trying to be really a voice for Jesus in the public square, whether that's in law, politics, media, or in the church or whatever, and trying to sort of present a Christian vision for society and a Christian perspective on all of these various moral challenges and issues that the nation faces. So we've been very engaged in the assisted suicide debate that's been happening over the last year or so, and it's just coming back again with a new private members bill at the moment and stuff. So to give you an example of that kind of thing, yeah.
That's so interesting. And so from what I've noticed, that there's all this news going on all the time, but you're right in the heart of it. All these stories are coming to you, people who are concerned ultimately about what they're facing in the workplace, be that's persecution or legal battles, things like that. So what is that like just as for you individually?
Well, it's exciting, and it's kind of, and it's great to work with a bunch of like-minded people who are in the fight, as you say, and keen to stand up for Christian values and Christian perspective and Christian ideas in society, and it's a privilege to help people. We do get 1,000 people at a year sort of phone up saying, "What are my rights with this? What can I do this? I've been asked to do this. I've been asked to teach that, or something like this. What can I do?" And I'm not on the legal side, but our legal team do a lot of that helping and stuff. And then, some of those cases, it's the tip of the iceberg really that get into the media. The vast majority don't, but some of those cases do. And then I might get involved in commenting in the media or writing articles about it and this kind of thing as well. So yeah, there's always things happening, always different things, lots of different stories, lots of, involvement in current affairs and stuff, and lots of interesting issues to talk about, tell people about, and discuss, and so on. Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to discussing some of those with you today. So just before we get into some of the cases, what drew you to Christian Concern? So as I understand that you had a fruitful career in fund management. So what was the drive to get involved in all this? So that's a big change, isn't it, from going from where you were to then here?
Yep. So I became interested in Islam after 9/11, and we kind of almost saw it happen live on the screens in the office as I'm working in finance as a fund manager, and we intuitively realized it was Islamic terrorism. I'd heard of suicide bombers before, but I thought they must be poor, illiterate, easily manipulable people, and this was people with very well educated pilots, well paid, not easily manipulable at all. And yet they were motivated to have such disregard for human life because of Islam. And so I wanted to understand Islam. So I started studying Islam just off my own back and reading about it, learning about it. And in that process, I came across Islamic finance. And I thought, I ought to understand Islamic finance since I work in finance as well. So I looked into that and found it's based on a modern radical interpretation of the Quran that says that interest is banned, whereas most Muslims throughout history and still today been very happy to borrow and lend with interest. And then I came across a chap who was chairman of HSBC's Sharia Advisory Board, and he'd written a book in English in which he asks a hypothetical question. He says, do we still need to wage jihad in a country like Britain, where we can freely build mosques and preach Islam? And his answer to the question is, according to the Quran, killing should continue until they pay the jizya tax. That's the subjugation tax for non-Muslims in an Islamic state. So I thought, wow, this guy's a full-on radical terrorist supporting, terrorist sympathizing cleric. I wrote to a friend at HSBC. He passed it on to compliance and they sacked him. They left his son on that advisory board and the other imams who doubtless knew and probably sympathized with his views. So that kind of opened my eyes to what Sharia finance is really all about, which is about really legitimizing Sharia law and a pathway towards Sharia law. So I then started praying for opportunity to talk and tell people about what I've been learning about Islam. And I thought, God, you've shown me all this stuff. I need to tell people now. And the answer to prayer I got was not what I wanted. I was asked to run a Sharia fund. So it would have been my name, Tim Dieppe, Sharia fund manager.
Wow, okay.
So I had to say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to legitimize Sharia law in this way. And I don't think we should do it as a firm either. And I tried to explain this to people, but people in my team weren't very sympathetic to my position. And I reached out for help and connected with Christian Concern through that, and built up some relationship with Christian Concern, started doing some work with Christian Concern behind the scenes a bit, advising on Islam-related stuff. And then a few years later, Andrea Williams, chief executive and founder here, said, why don't you come and work for us on this kind of thing? So that's how I got into it 10 years ago. Yeah.
Super interesting. And you also have a master's in kingdom theology as well. So
Yeah.
how does that influence and shape what you're doing here as well?
Yeah, so I decided to do a degree in theology with WTC. It's a kind of nice mix of part-time, could be done on top of a demanding full-time job, which I had in finance. You had like 2 residential weekends a year and then weekly meetings in a hub in London, which I could get to after work, with more lectures and stuff like that. So I did that and ended up managing to complete a whole master's in theology that way. I found it really helped me, mainly give me confidence in theological understanding, in being able to write essays. I did maths at university and hadn't really written an essay since I was about 16, really. But actually, I found I could write quite well and learned how to write better through it, and found I could interact with top theologians and critique their views and get good marks and write a clear argument and things. So it gave me a huge amount of confidence that I could do that, which has been really helpful because a lot of what we do here is related to theological questions and stuff. And so it's given me confidence to write and speak and talk about theological issues from having done that. Yeah.
And for people that aren't aware, can you explain what kingdom values are? What are we trying to do ultimately as Christians, as in ushering in the kingdom? What is that in layman's terms?
Well, the kingdom is the reign of God, isn't it? So it's like, what does it say in the Lord's Prayer? Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, what's it like in heaven? It's obviously perfect, no pain, no sickness, no injustice, so all these things. So, you're really wanting to pray and seek a world like that as best we can have it. Obviously, we can't have it because it's not heaven. It won't ever be heaven until we get there. But, we try and alleviate injustices. We try and alleviate pain and suffering. We try and make people whole and well and worshiping God. And that's expanding the kingdom of God. The reign of God in the earth involves all of those things.
It's so important, isn't it? I think if I'm not mistaken, after Jesus was baptized, he says, "Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand." It's one of the first things he said after he's been baptized, which really struck me. Actually, somebody pointed out to me once. I was like, okay, this is very important in
Mm.
terms of what
Oh
we
no,
are.
there's a lot about kingdom in what Jesus said and stuff,
Yeah.
and there's the kind of now and not yet aspect to it. Obviously, we're
Mm,
not in heaven, but also we can start to see something of God's kingdom on earth today, and we should try and achieve that.
mm. So getting into like the legal side now. So the law itself, human rights, a lot of these have deep roots in Christianity. How is it we've got to this place now where Christians are getting persecuted in terms of at least the application of the law now? And yeah, how have we got to this place where yeah, this is happening in the workplace, on the streets, in schools, and
Well, I
otherwise?
think we were a Christian nation. We had that. The king's coronation 3 years ago, and he swears to uphold the Protestant religion established by law and the proclamation of the gospel, this kind of thing. But it's become meaningless. Like those words were meaningful in the nation for hundreds and hundreds of years,
Mm,
and it's become meaningless, just words. And it's and we've kind of turned our back on Christianity as a nation and become almost anti-Christian, or in some ways we are really anti-Christian. In terms of we've redefined marriage, and then people who say, "Well, I don't believe, I believe marriage is only between a man and a woman," for example, get persecuted. People have lost their jobs for saying that,
yeah.
and things, and that's clearly anti-Christian, and that would be unthinkable just a few decades ago that would happen. And particularly on sexual morality, you know, conservative Christian views, which were mainstream a few
Mm,
decades ago, are now pilloried and mocked and ridiculed and seen as not worthy of a job and all this kind of stuff.
mm,
So, I mean, it's changing. The transgenderism went so far, and now it's in retreat, really, because a number of very significant legal cases and general pushback from people thinking, "Hang on a minute, surely we shouldn't be allowing convicted male sex offenders into women's prisons, right? I mean, surely not. Surely, going referring now to one of our cases, surely
mm.
a nurse who calls a convicted paedophile Mister in his presence when it says male on his medical forms and when he's having a male specific biological procedure shouldn't be disciplined for that. Surely we shouldn't be allowing a biological man who says he's trying to impregnate his girlfriend to change in the women's changing rooms.
Mm,
Surely we shouldn't. And so the public backlash against this, has been quite high, and the tide is turning. And the new health secretary, I think, was, previously said um, some women have penises or something still like this, and now he's backtracking, saying, "No, no, I don't believe that anymore." And then the
that's wild.
presenter asks him,
Yeah.
"Well, why did you ever believe it?" He doesn't have a good answer.
Yeah.
You know, so yes, there is some pushback and so on, but we've got into crazy places because we've abandoned Christianity and Christian
Mm,
morals, and we've got no real moral foundation as a nation now.
yeah. Yeah. It seems that we've got to a place where disease it's got so ridiculous where people who are non-Christians and just common sense kind of shows that we've gone the pendulum has swung too far
Yeah,
one way. But yeah, I'd love to touch on the Jennifer Melle case in a second that just was mentioned there.
yeah.
But broadly speaking, can you what in your estimation, what is it that Christian concern is fighting ultimately? What are you holding against, or what are you advancing?
Um, Two questions: what are we opposed to, and what are we
Yeah,
for?
like what are
Like
you
we're
fighting, like in a
for
spiritual sense or
we're
otherwise? Yeah.
for a Christian vision of a nation. We're for Christian values of the nation, which is better for everyone. Like
Hmm.
it's better for everyone if marriage is between man and woman. It just is. It's better for everyone if people. We don't try and pretend that people can change their sex. It's better for those people as well as everyone else as well. For example, it's better for everyone if assisted suicide is not legalized, for example, as well. So we basically believe these Christian values are best for the whole nation, best for every person, Christian or not. And so we advocate for Christian values and Christian principles across the nation, across our laws, across our culture, and so on. And we're standing against the rise of LGBT ideology, secularist ideology, and Islamic ideology that are, in the sort of spiritual vacuum that our nation now finds itself in with the abandonment of Christianity. They're rivaling, they're coming in and they're taking ground and becoming more influential.
Yeah, what comes to mind there is this has come up quite a lot recently, online and in my life as well when having conversation with people. There is no neutrality, is there? It's either
No,
one way or the other. Can you speak to that? Because what people often say, like in a liberal society, you can allow all these things, but ultimately, if you're allowing this thing, that would mean you're excluding something else, and otherwise, it's like we can't. If yeah, in terms of various of these issues, you're saying ultimately the law will come down on one side at the end of the day.
Mm.
So is that the challenge? Is that they were trying to allow everything in
Well,
terms?
it's a really good point, and it is something that is often missed by people, that there is no neutrality in the mix of all this. And people pretend that there is a neutrality, and they think that there is.
Mm,
In this dispute in my workplace about whether to run a Sharia fund, I had a conversation with my boss, and he knew I was a Christian, and he said to me at one point, it's a quite a heated conversation. Fair enough, I don't mind that. And he said, the thing is, Tim, you're coming across this from a particular worldview, and I went straight back with, so are you.
yeah, yeah,
And for once, he was like, you know, he didn't know what to say
right,
because
okay,
he thought he was neutral.
yeah,
And he suddenly realized he couldn't say he was neutral because
yeah,
there isn't a neutral position,
yeah.
right?
Sounds like a
Um,
good one-liner, but it's actually not.
yeah, there
Yeah,
isn't a neutral position.
yeah.
So he's got a worldview too, and he's coming from a particular worldview, and that's guiding his stance. And so, and that applies to every area of politics and law and culture and so on. There isn't a neutral position. Either you are doing something right and good, but either you're basically trying to follow God's ways or you're
Mm,
not. And
mhm,
if you're not, you're following some other ways or some other guide for your spirituality, for your ethics, for your morals. If you think about it, Luke, what guides your ethics, what decides what's right and wrong for you
mm,
is your God.
yeah.
That's one way of defining God. What the thing
Mm,
that defines for you what's right and wrong is your God.
mhm,
Either that is the God of the Bible or it's something else.
mm,
And there isn't a neutral position.
mm.
And that applies to the nation as well as to individuals.
Yeah, would you say that at least en masse, would you say the God that this nation worships is self, or yeah, what were your thoughts on that?
There are a number of competing gods at the moment, but one of them is definitely self identity.
Mm,
The God of self, that I can define who I am. This is the blasphemy is you're insulting my core identity when you say I'm not a woman, if I'm pretending to be a woman or whatever. This kind of thing. So yes, that is one of the gods that is there. Islam is another one of the gods. Just general sort of the whole sexual perversion thing of LGBT is another one of the gods and stuff that's there. And then general greed is another. There are multiple gods, and they're all
mm.
competing, and they're all out there.
Okay, so before we come on some of the cases, so you regularly appear in the media representing Christian concern and Christian issues. What is the, do you find the biggest challenge when you're trying to communicate these contentious issues, whether it's on the news or otherwise?
The biggest challenge on that.
Yeah, what are you facing pushback against oftentimes?
The biggest challenge is to really be courageous and unashamed of the truth. And just, the fact is, the truth is on our side, right? That's a big plus, right?
Yeah.
And God is on our side. That's a big plus. And you just got to keep saying the truth and not let somebody intimidate you or, or pressure you or whatever, or, and not allow yourself to be compromised on it and this kind of
Mm,
thing. I think that's probably the biggest challenge of just being clear, making sure you know all the facts, making sure you
mm,
make all the key points you want to make. It's not easy, it's not easy, but yeah, it can be done.
mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's definitely not easy. I mean, when I used to be an atheist, I also became to faith because I believe Christianity is true. It's
Yeah.
quite inconvenient, to be honest, in many ways. I had to lay a lot of things down. I was like, wait a minute, I used to ridicule these people. And now I'm finding out that this is true. So,
Right.
yeah, definitely inconvenient. And I find that ultimately that's what we need to do, like you say. And luckily, we
Yes.
don't, because it is true, we don't have
Yes.
to worry about other things going in the background. And yeah, I think it's a real
And
plus.
the great thing about these conversations, when you go in the media or even a conversation like this, Luke, is you're showing Christians and others like how to argue about these issues,
Mm,
the kind of points you could make. People will watch a conversation like this and think, oh, I could say that to my friends, or I could say
mm,
that to my relatives, or,
mm,
oh, that's helped me understand this, and then, that's making a difference and that's encouraging people. And, if I'm bold in the media under pressure, people think maybe I could be a bit bolder with my
mm.
friends, something like that. And that's great.
Yeah, speaking of that, what boldness seems to encourage seems to be one of the things where we're lacking in the West, particularly. Is that something which you share as well in terms of that belief? And how can Christians
What we have lost
be
is
bold?
moral courage,
Mm,
where people have a sense of this is the morally right thing to do, and I'm not going to stand in the way, and I'm not going to compromise it. I'm not going to let
mm,
it let it let it challenge me, and I'm not going to compromise on it. We have great morally courageous people, and our clients are great examples where they've said, "No, I'm not going to stand for this. If it costs me my job, it costs me my livelihood, it costs
wow.
me this,
Yeah.
I'll do it." And
That's
it's
good.
great to meet these people and to see that they feel God has absolutely honored them in those
Mm,
choices and those decisions when they've
yeah.
done it. But far too many Christians and others are cowed by the pressure in work to, oh well, no, maybe it's not so bad. Oh, well,
Hmm.
maybe, oh well, maybe I better not to offend somebody. I'll just go along with this. I'll just go along with that. The number, in the Darlington nurse's case, which we're probably going to come on to, where this guy is saying, I'm a woman, I don't want to get
Hmm.
changed with the women's changing rooms. There were initially something like 50 plus nurses who objected to this. And the hospital trust put pressure on them, more and more pressure on them, saying,
Mm.
we're going to put disciplinary process, we do this, that it whittled down to 5 or 6, right? Those are the ones that finally got to court and finally won,
Wow. Okay.
right?
Yeah.
But
Awesome.
before initially there was a letter signed by dozens of these nurses. I can't remember the exact number, dozens of nurses. But then most of them backed off when the pressure came. Right?
Mm.
This means you're violating your contract. This means you're, subject to disciplinary process, whatever. And those with true moral courage are like, no, this is not right. I'm not, whatever you say, I'm still going to do it. Even if it might cost me my job.
Mm.
And in the end, they won. Right. So, but that's whatever it is, 1 in 10. And that, even the ones who signed the letter in the first place had some moral courage, but they didn't have so much.
Yeah. No, I found that very admirable. It's yeah, I think there's maybe some interesting things shared there as well. So I remember somebody I know who's in the NHS, and when it came to the COVID vaccines, for example, they were kind of a bit on the fence to be honest, but they were strong armed into taking the vaccine basically because they weren't happy with. And I thought it was really interesting how they were, even though they're quite bold normally, they were just really pressured by peers and the system to do that, whereas some
There was a
people
lot of
didn't.
pressure.
Yeah, and I think that, as I understand it,
People
it
did
would have
lose their
cost them the
jobs over
job,
that.
even though
Yeah.
they're in it for like 30
Yeah.
plus years as
Yeah.
an excellent
Mm, mm,
team
mm.
member as well, which is not good. So I think with some of these cases, these might shock people because they seem to be very shocking. They are quite extreme. However, can you just walk us through? Well, you've touched on it already, but the Jennifer Melle case in terms of that nurse. How did how did that happen? What was the flashpoint, or in terms of that particular moment for her, and how was that elapsed over the time?
Yes. So this nurse, Jennifer Melle, I think she's Ugandan origin, I'm pretty sure. And she um, works in a hospital, and she got asked, please come and help this patient. This patient is a convicted paedophile who is actually chained up, serving prison, and had a male specific procedure being carried out, wanted to be discharged. And so Jennifer reads the notes, says, by the way, male on the notes, and calls up the doctor in his presence and says, Mr. So and so would like to be discharged. At which the patient says, you can't call me Mr. I'm Mrs. whatever, and lunges at her and racially abuses her as well, calls her the N words multiple times. And she was, somewhat upset and traumatized a bit by
Mm,
this, but, kind of stood her ground and went on to other things, and then was suspended for having misgendered this patient, this convicted paedophile. And the thing with a case like this is, in a sense, all you have to do is put it out to the public
mm,
because it's so obviously unjust,
mm,
right? Like, how can you possibly discipline someone for referring to a convicted paedophile as Mister? Right? How can you possibly do it? This is the absurdity of transgenderism. It just gets crazy,
crazy.
you know. So, so it went. We took it to the media, and and put pressure on the hospital about it. And in the end, I think after 10 months of pressure like this, plus also, I think along the line, we won the Darlington nurses case as well. In
Mm.
this case, the trust backed down and said, okay, you can come back to work. You've done nothing wrong.
And what
So,
wasn't there some like crossover as well? So as I understand it, that particular NHS trust, they leaned on their own understanding of their policy around it, whereas not long before there was a Supreme Court ruling for the nurses, is that right? But yet they didn't did they ignore that, or in terms of
well,
the
I
High
think
Court?
I mean, who knows what was in their mind exactly,
Mm,
right?
sure.
But the fact is that she was suspended for 10 months, which is quite high stress,
That is very
right?
stressful, yeah.
She was being paid, but like, am I going to have my job, or am I going to lose
Mm,
my entire career, whatever?
mm.
She's also investigated by the Nursing and Midwifery Council (NMC), which had the power to withdraw her license to nurse to do nursing at all and prevent her from doing that. So that's a whole nother thing. Now
Mhm.
that only was resolved, I think, last week, with the NMC finally saying, okay, you're clear, no further action on this. So now she's completely clear. She's back working in hospital. When she went back, lots of people hugged her, were so
Yeah.
upset to hear how she'd been
Wow.
treated and that, and she had lots of thank you cards and all this kind of thing.
That's
You know,
great to hear that appears like
so it's
yeah.
it's the senior managers who are captured by this road cardiology who
Mm.
make these
Yep.
crazy decisions, and they ended up backing down, as they should. Good. The fact is, it should never have happened in the first place. But
Mm.
anyway, there we are. She's back, and that's good. And it's highlighted some of the nonsense that is going on in these
Mm.
hospitals. And then the Darlington nurses case is different, where they had this man saying, I want to get changed in the women's changing rooms. I'm a woman now, and even though he's saying I want to impregnate my girlfriend, and like I said, some of these nurses were like, no, we're not going to stand for this.
Mm.
And the NHS just put a lot of pressure on them and said, you need to be re-educated, you'll be discriminatory, all this kind of thing. Anyway, right up till the day before it got to court, I thought the NHS are going to back down because there was
Of
another
course they would.
legal
Yeah,
reading.
yeah.
There's been a recent legal reading about this Sandy Peggy nurse in Scotland, which they won. And so they can't believe they're going to win this case. But they did. They went to court. And I think it was a 3-week hearing in the end. And they won the hearing. And
Mm.
so, so they're having to find alternative facilities for him, which is what they should have done in the first place,
Mm.
rather than say, because you're call yourself a woman, you could go and change the women's changing rooms. No, that's not right. So that's great. They are still being investigated by the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the NMC, and that process is still going through. We don't know how long it will take. Again, it's crazy. What are they investigating them for? For saying we want to get changed in a women's changing room without men there. I mean, really? I mean, why is that a subject of any disciplinary question at all?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. But they are having to go through a process on that. I hope they win. If they don't, the NMC will be very embarrassed in the media, and we'll see what happens about it. But it'd be crazy to strike them off for being nurses for that, But this is the nonsense that
We do
we
live in
have with
weird
these
times, don't we?
regulatory organisations that
Yeah.
that feel like this is not politically correct, and therefore they're not able to be nurses.
Mm.
Well, that's crazy.
And speaking, you mentioned there, so like it's not always the people like on the front lines. It
Yeah,
can be the management. There's also a similar case with Luke Salmons. Can you
yeah.
speak to that as well, and how was that developed over the last since it started?
So this is totally different. Luke Salmons is a police officer,
Mm-hmm.
and he had some compulsory training, which all the police officers did. And one of the training sessions was about religion, but it really was about Islam. And they were told it's a safe space. You can ask whatever questions you want. This is the place to ask your questions, this kind of thing. So Luke did. And he asked some questions. So what is jihad? What do you think jihad is? And asked some questions about what about the conflict in Gaza and how does that play into all this, which is a real issue on the streets that
Mm.
the police having to deal with. And he asked relevant questions, and the trainer engaged with him respectfully, and it seemed to be a good conversation in the
And
end.
he was a Muslim, is one that he trained.
Yes, and in the end, Luke sort of had to say, "Let's discuss this later over coffee," sort of thing, and they did that. And um, and to me, the most extraordinary thing, Luke, was that at one point the trainers walked up and down the room chanting, "Islam is a religion of peace," as if that's how you train police officers. As if, what do they think these police officers are so dumb that they just believe something if it's chanted enough times?
Right.
I mean, it's very insulting to the police officers, but it's also, I think they realize they've got no rational arguments. They just chant it. I mean, it's crazy that counts as police training. Chanting is illusion of peace. It's crazy. Anyway, the point is that the next day, I think he was called into the inspector's office, and the inspector said, "I don't like your beliefs." He was like, "Well, what have I done now?"
Mm.
And he ends up getting suspended, and a huge long process of suspension, which pressured him and stressed his family and everything. So in the end, he'd resigned. But he came to us, and I'm pleased to say that we, challenged the decision to suspend him, and he was even like barred from policing forever. Like, he was put on a police barred list, and we challenged this decision. And the new chief constable of North Yorkshire Police agreed that he should not have been suspended and should not have been disciplined for this and should not be on the barred list. He's back allowed to work for police again. And so that's the result. But it's still like, why did this ever happen?
He's gone through all of that.
How can you be suspended for asking questions about Islam in a training course where you're told this is a safe space, you can ask questions? I mean, really, that's crazy.
And as you say, so the Christian, so Luke, and then the guy who was doing the course, the Muslim, they had a good conversation over coffee, but then he got fired or suspended, whatever it is, by the higher up manager. So even though the Christian and the Muslim are getting on, then somebody else has said, I don't like these beliefs, essentially, even though they've had an amicable conversation and respectful.
Yes.
And I find that a bit strange as well. It's not like
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And it's part of the wider police culture. Obviously we've had the Henry Novak case and, there's a lot of talk about two-tier policing, which is a reality, And if they're being trained in this kind of way, here we are. Islam is like the biggest terrorist threat. Our terror threat at the moment is severe, which means the attack's highly likely. And the most likely ideology to motivate that is Islam. And they're being taught nonsense about it, stupid slogans. Right. So it's just, the police culture needs a whole massive overhaul, I think, because it's gone very
It doesn't
corrupt.
look good, is it? It must be very hard for like police officers as well, particularly those who are, sensitive to these issues, because I don't trust the police, to be honest, even though there must be, I know some personally police who are in there and I trust them. But then in terms of generally speaking, they have a very bad situation at the moment where even like you said, a lot of the training they're getting isn't actually is promoting treating people differently, which seems to be the complete antithetical to the law.
It is.
Which is I don't know how to even go about that. It's very challenging. So so these cases are really interesting, and it's great to hear that they've had good outcomes from their perspective. Are there any other cases at the moment that you can share that's equally strange and
Well, we've had lots of cases, Luke, recently. I mean, one that comes to mind that's been very high profile is Bernard Randall, who now, I think nearly 7 years ago, preached a sermon in a school chapel in which he said, you don't have to agree with LGBT ideology. You can make your own mind up if you want to. And he ended up losing his job over this.
Right. Yeah.
And then the Church of England, it was reported to Prevent, and it reported to the DBS people, and the Church of England branded him a safeguarding risk because he doesn't necessarily agree with LGBT ideology.
Wow.
So
the Church of England should check the Bible.
Well, they should. It's crazy, and he's therefore been banned from ministering in any context ever since. And that's crazy. Now I'm hoping we're going to get some resolution on that. And we'll see. But it is this is kind of crazy. We've had lots of street preacher cases. We had one recently of a chap who asked a question of a Muslim, and this Muslim lady was manning a stall about domestic violence, and she was wearing a hijab. So if you're in a stall, you're inviting a conversation, aren't you? Right? So he went to her and said to her, "Are you Muslim?" She said, "Yes." Said, "So what do you make of this verse in the Quran that says you can beat your wife?" Relevant to domestic violence, isn't it? Okay. Right? They had a conversation. Then she reported him to the police. Before he knows it, half a dozen police officers there. You criticized Islam. It's not good. and he got arrested. You know, now in the end, no charges, because he asked us for help and everything, no charges came. But it's crazy that the police would think that that's something worth arresting someone for, having a conversation in the street with somebody about what Islam teaches about domestic violence when they're at a domestic violence stand. It's so crazy. And there are many other cases, teachers as well, who've run into problems because of what they've said in school or what they've been required to teach in school or something like that, or even what they've said on social media. So we've had some really big victories in all these cases.
Well, that's great to hear that. And what do these cases collectively tell us about the freedom of conscience and freedom in terms of religious freedoms at the moment?
That it's under threat, that it's being challenged, that people are losing their jobs for expressing their Christian beliefs or for abiding by their Christian beliefs and conscience and that kind of thing, and or being arrested for expressing their Christian beliefs, things as well. So we are becoming an anti-Christian society, and religious freedom is under threat. And we do win these cases because the law at the moment still does protect us, but the police don't seem to believe that is what the law does or says, and find it easier to arrest people than ask questions later, it seems. And workplaces as well don't seem to pay attention to our cases. So yes, we're in challenging times for Christians at the moment.
Yeah. And so I was struck recently by something you said, actually. I was at a conference where you were speaking, and it was about the assisted dying bill, which is going through the moment. And then you mentioned a case, I think there's multiple cases in Canada where similar legislation has gotten through. And there was a lady who was basically sentenced as though she was a burden. And then she shared with the doctors, as you understand it, that she wasn't sure. But I think she wasn't sure that she wants to be here anymore because she's a burden. And obviously, I think that would, in my perspective anyway, command sympathy. No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And you'd be encouraged rather than discouraged. But in this case, they then referred her on.
I think the case I'm thinking of is, she's being taken to hospital. She's in pain, and she says, "I can't live like this."
Right.
Now, I've said that when I'm ill.
Yeah, likewise.
Right?
Yeah.
I can't live like this,
Yeah.
But the doctor in Canada thought that counts as a request for assisted suicide. If I don't refer you on, I could get into trouble. So I'll refer you on for assisted suicide. And I understand the next day she was dead. Right? Now, that's not compassion.
No.
That is not care. That is not healthcare. That is actually killing.
Yeah.
So that is where you can get to if you legalize assisted suicide in a country. And,
wow. I didn't know that happened in the
when you do legalize assisted suicide, this is the way care changes. Another example would be in the Netherlands. A story I read of a guy who was in hospital in the Netherlands, English guy, and he had bed sores from being in bed all this time. And you can imagine the doctors come round every morning. How are you doing, Mr. So-and-so? I'm doing all right, but I've got these bed sores. Is there anything you can do about them? No, I don't think there is anything to do. We can refer you for end of life. Now, imagine every day in hospital that the option they give you is, we can end your life if you want. He managed to get transferred to a British hospital. Same thing. Doctors come round. How are you doing? I'm all right, but I've got these bed sores. So let's see what we can do about that. Right?
That's the right response.
And then they managed to do something, and they managed to work out a way to alleviate the pain and sort out the bed sores, because the mentality is not, oh, if you're in pain and suffering, your life's not worth it and might as well end it. The mentality is, let's try and give you as best quality life as we can for as long as we can. And you see how the mentality changes because the law has changed in the Netherlands.
So that's a real life implication, isn't it? Like, if you do this, then you can do that. Like you said, the doctors might be doing malpractice.
Law changes culture, and it makes people think, oh, this is acceptable. Yeah, you might as well just have suicide if you're not really very well. And people feel pressured to have suicide. Whereas it should be that you discourage people from suicide. It should be you say, no, your life is still worth living. God's giving you life. Let's see how we can make it good.
And that's another factor of having no God in life, isn't it? If you don't appreciate life, you don't value life, then so what? It ultimately seems that I presume a lot of these doctors are thinking about the law money as well. Like if this person's having bed sores, they're gonna be here for a long time. That costs money, and then people become more of a
All of those
commodity.
factors, all those factors come into play. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's very sad. But okay, so moving on slightly, bit of a pivot. But what recommendations do you have for parents, churches, people who are currently challenged by some of these issues? How can they, the regular parents, for example, and the children's at school, and they're being taught about things that they might not believe in. And I think at school you are in the world ultimately, so you're going to expect some things which you agree with, some things which you don't. But how can parents respond or go about having their children in a school where they've been taught things which they may or may not agree with? What recommendations do you have for them? Is there a time when they should stand up, or should they let some things slide? What's your perspective on that? And maybe you could weave in a case or two, perhaps, if you've got any to mind.
So, um, well, one thing to say is that, do consider home education or group education with a bunch of other people, or Christian schools. There's a whole load of new movements of those kind of things coming up. But I know that's not always an easy option for a lot of people. My children
Mm.
went to Church of England schools,
Mm.
so state schools, but Church of England state schools.
Mm.
But raise your voice, right? Complain to the school. And too few parents are willing to do that because they're worried about stigmatizing their child or something like this, but actually you should do it. I did it several times. One time my son, year 7, I think, they said he's going to go on a visit to a mosque. I said, okay, fine. That's probably good education. So we let him go on a visit to the mosque. He came back and said, do you know what they did? The imam wanted to lead us all in prayers to Allah. And if you really didn't want to do that, you had to stand over in a corner. And about 10 people in the year group, which should be about 150 or something like that, maybe, 10 people stood aside the corner, including my son. Right? So we wrote to the school and said, why was this imam allowed to lead these children in leading prayers to Allah? And the school wrote back and said, oh, no, it was just a mark of respect. So we said, no, it's not a mark of respect. Respect is not optional. The teachers should have all done it if it's a mark of respect. That's not right. And so then in the end, the school chaplain phoned up my wife and said, you're absolutely right. It shouldn't have happened. And we'll make sure it never happens again. Now, so great. We stopped it from happening again, right? From really one email. But the point is, we knew some of the other Christian parents of children who had obviously been well taught because they stood aside, but they were too scared, even with that, to write to the school about
Even though it's Church of England school.
Yes, even though they were their church people and everything like that.
So you wouldn't expect, for example, if you were to flip it, you wouldn't expect children who were Muslims to pray
no,
to
or
Jesus
Jewish.
either.
Exactly.
To speak for
Yes.
fairness.
No,
Yeah.
it's completely wrong. So it should never happen. Another example, my son came back from school and said they're handing out stickers saying some people are gay, get over it. And everyone's sticking them on their school rucksacks and their school textbooks and exercise books and stuff. So I wrote a letter to the school saying, why are you handing out stickers with an offensive slogan? A High Court has ruled, because I knew this for one of our cases. It's before I was a Christian, but I knew High Court has ruled that this slogan is an offensive slogan. So surely you shouldn't hand out stickers with that. School wrote back to me saying we're very worried about homophobia, homophobic bullying, but we are going to stop handing out the stickers. So I stopped it. One email. That's all it took, right?
Yeah.
One email, right? Another example, my son happened to listen with me to a podcast about the gender-bread person. I picked him up from a youth group. I don't know if you heard about this. It's a transgender propaganda thing where you have this picture of a gingerbread man sort of thing. And they have, the diagram says, spectrum of sex, a spectrum of gender, a spectrum of attraction, a spectrum of, and, assigned at birth, sex, and all this nonsense. It's very controversial, which is why I listened to a podcast about it, because there was the controversy in the time was it was being used in BBC training, for the staff training. So
they're supposed to be impartial.
So of course my son asked, what is this genderbread person? I explained to him it's very controversial because this is, next week he comes home from school and says to me, you never got through what we learned in school today, Dad. We were taught the genderbread person. I'm like, you what? So I wrote to the school saying, why are you teaching this obvious transgender propaganda, which you're not allowed to do? You're not allowed to teach transgender propaganda. It breaches school regulations. to do that. The school wrote back to me and said, "Oh, no, we weren't teaching it. It was just for discussion." So I said to my son, "Is that right? Was it just for discussion?" He said, "We had to copy out our exercise books. That means you're being taught it as fact." So I wrote back to the school again and said, basically, not in exactly these words, but you're lying. It was not for discussion. It was copied out in his textbooks, right? So you have breached the regulations here. Then the school wrote back and said, "We'll have a full investigation into this now. Independent person investigate." A few weeks later, 10-page report they send back to me. A lot of gumph, but it said in the end that the lesson plan hadn't been followed by this particular teacher. So I said, "Okay, send me the lesson plan." Point blank refused.
Really going for it? Really?
Point blank refused.
Okay.
At that point, my wife was dying, so it got dropped. But yeah, they won't use that again, right?
Just goes to show, like,
that.
if you actually take action, and these are emails, right? These aren't
Yes.
like big confrontations and things.
Yeah, you just need to send an email. Yeah, I know. And another case, Luke, they said to me, my son's going to have a focus day on Islam and science. Now, Islam's been really good for science. And I'm thinking, what do you mean Islam's been good for science? It has not been good for science. What are they going to teach him? Now, you know David Wood, the YouTuber?
Yep.
He did a video a few years back about 1001. He's critiquing a propaganda video called 1001 Inventions of Islam or Muslims or something like that. And it's a 10-minute video about that. And I said to my son, just watch this before you go into that lesson, right? So he did. Next day he comes home. Never guess what they showed us in class, Dad? They showed us that very propaganda video that David Wood said is a load of nonsense. Because it claims that Muslims invented flight because people tried to jump off, mosques with wings. So Muslims invented flight. It's got stupid claims in it. And so I then went and found a peer-reviewed academic article that says that this video and the contents are so flawed, should never be used in a classroom. Right, and goes through all of the historical inaccuracies and errors and scientific errors in this video. And I sent it to the teacher concerned saying, what did you use that for? It's obviously not suitable for use in a classroom, right? I can't remember what he wrote back, but they won't use that again. So you've just got to engage like this.
I think most reasonable Muslims would probably deny that as well. I mean, that seems like a crazy thing to claim.
Yeah, all it takes is sending off an email when stupid things happen like this and saying, hang on a minute, this isn't right. You shouldn't be doing this. And you can make a difference. One email will make a difference, and changes what the school will do, and it is not just for your kids, for all the other kids in the class and the school. Makes a difference.
And it starts with us, doesn't it, as well? We can't just expect everybody else to do all of the work. Even like this, what we're doing today, this conversation, I think one of the reasons I wanted to start having conversations with Christians was because I just thought, I don't see it happening all the time. There are obviously people doing this in terms of having conversations, but I'm like, I was really prompted to do that because in terms of when people interact with Christians and they see Christians having reasonable conversations, I think it's quite encouraging for them as well. And but ultimately, if it starts with, so it does start with, doesn't it, in terms of taking responsibility for how we interact with the world, not expecting it to just change and become, Christian or whatever it is, if we're Christian, for example. So is that something you'd just recommend in terms of like general, instead of waiting until it gets to some extreme point and then you need to be represented? But with everyday things, you're just like being bold and courageous and just taking a stand.
Yes, you've got to decide if you're a parent in a school, it's kind of a different relationship. You can decide which ones to tackle, as you go along. But if you're in a workplace, you might suddenly be presented with something. So in a sense, you've got to decide in advance in your heart what you're happy to do and what you're happy not to do, and when it comes to it, being ready with what you'll say and so on. But you need to be prepared to say no and prepared to stand up for your conscience. And the point is, Luke, that God's much more interested in developing your character than he is in developing your career. Right? These tests aren't an accident, right? God brings them along for you to test you. Like, this should be a fun management thing for me.
Yeah.
It was a test. And because I passed it, then God gave me a new role and new opportunities and stuff. So these tests will come. They're not easy. It was stressful for me.
Yeah.
Right? It's stressful for all these people concerned and so on. But God uses them to develop your character. And after I'd done that, I became somebody who had stood up against Islamic finance, which I wasn't before, right? You see, so it made me something else in a way, right? And that's what it does to people. You know, our clients, the Darlington nurses, are now, famous. They're the nurses who stood up against this. Good for them. And so that gives them a whole another opportunity and a whole sort of audience, a whole new audience of people who will listen to them because of what they've done.
Has there been like a particular conversation or moment which is like solidified why this mission that you're doing, representing Christians, has been worth it? Whether it's been you've seen a real injustice or similar, and you're like, right, I need to take a stand with these people.
Um, no, I think what happens all the time. All the time, we're thinking,
Really?
yeah, all the
Wow.
time. We're thinking,
Okay, that's
this is
love that.
crazy. This shouldn't happen. We need to fight this. We need to do this. We need to do that.
It's constant.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. All these cases, we're thinking, no, this is wrong. We've got to stand up. We've got to do something about this. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's really encouraging. Love to hear that. And presumably, I'm just guessing here, lots of the things that you're involved with will involve criticism. So how do you confront that? And is it due to lots of misunderstanding, would you say? Or how would you answer that?
So when we get criticism of non-Christians, it's understandable, right? Because they don't have the faith and they don't have the truth and they don't have the knowledge of the Bible and all this sort of stuff. And so, understandably, you said yourself, you're an atheist and you used to ridicule Christians,
I did.
understandable. It's harder when it's Christians or people who profess to be Christians who criticize you and say, this is wrong, you're doing it the wrong way, you're saying the wrong thing, whatever. That's when it's harder. And then you have to sort of be gracious and check your heart and make sure you are doing the right thing and stuff, but also be firm and try and inspire courage and moral courage in other Christians as well in the mix of these things. Yeah.
And looking at the trajectory of the previous decade and then the next, what are the things which we need to be aware of? Do you think it's been a bit of a strange 10 years, hasn't it? Do you see change happening in the next decade in a positive way?
Well, the question is, Luke, we kind of, we've seen so much anti-Christian stuff in the last decade, and it has gone, to absurd levels, like in the transgender case we've just been talking about and stuff. And so the question is, where do we go from here? Does the tide turn, and do we start seeing a return to Christian values in some way or other? The health secretary used to say, men can have a penis. Now, oh no, I don't believe that anymore. Are we going to see more of that happening, or are we going to see, more craziness and more silly ideas and more oppression and persecution of Christians? And that's the question. And there are signs of a quiet revival. The Bible stars are at a record high. Lots of churches reporting increased attendance and increased conversions and so on as well. It's small, but it's something. And the sense of people longing for us to go back to our Christian roots as a nation is quite strong as well, particularly amongst working class elements, I think. And so that desire, but ultimately, I think that God is judging the nation for turning its back on Him, and I think that His aim is for us to repent and turn back to Him. And I think one day He'll achieve that. The only question is how far do we have to go, and how painful does it have to be going through that process? And that's the question I don't know the answer to.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. So not got too long to go now, but before we move on to our closing questions, so you've written a lot about the grooming gangs. Could you speak to what your recommendations are going from here to the government?
Yes, so we put out a report in November last year called UK Grooming Gangs in Islam by Australian scholar Mark Jury, who basically explains that grooming gangs are more associated with Islam than they are with ethnicity. And he explains sort of, I think it's 11 points of connection between Islamic teaching or doctrine and grooming gang offences and crimes and stuff. And so, you know, this has been ignored and or silenced or not allowed to say it or whatever. And I'm encouraged in a way because more people are starting to say it. We had the rape going inquiry from Rupert Lowe, came out a couple of weeks ago that repeated a lot of stuff from our report in there about Islam. The actual national inquiry into grooming gangs, the original terms of reference did not include religion. Then after some pressure, they changed it so it does include religion. I want to say, are they really going to do that? Are they really going to look at Islam and look at the Islamic relation and so on? We sent a letter to the chair of the inquiry with our report, had no reply. We'll see what happens, but are they really going to tackle it? Or what are they going to do to, again, change the culture in the police that is not about we mustn't arrest these Muslims because in case we get accused of Islamophobia or get accused of racism or something like that, to, like you were saying, equality before the law will, if you offence, you commit offence, I don't care what your background is, don't care what your background culture is, don't care what your religion teaches, it's still an offence. So I think we need to see some changes along these lines. I hope that the National Inquiry delves in, gets some answers, exposes the Islamic nature of these crimes and talks about that openly and raises that question. I hope so, but I'm not super confident because there's still an aura of political correctness around this, and still, only when the rape gang inquiry came out, one of the victims, was it Sammy Woodhouse, went on Channel 4, Good Morning Britain, one of those shows, and the producer said to her beforehand, don't talk about the religion or ethnicity of the perpetrators on air. She did that because she didn't care. But the fact is the producer told her not to. So it shows that there's still a culture of let's not talk about the real causes here, better not do that. So it's a problem.
Wow. And I think there's so many people tied up in it as well. It just gets so complicated. And it's like the whole Jimmy Savile thing that went on for so long, but people were just trying to cover it up for whatever reason. And for me, it's just like similarly with that, it's just the equality before the law is all I'm after. So it affects everybody the same, not after special treatment for Christians or otherwise, just equality before the law. And I think that would sort all of this out, but it just needs to be applied. I think that's the key, isn't it? But we'll see what happens. Okay, so equipping the church. The church has a big role to play in the nation. What do you think local churches need to understand and do differently when it comes to lots of these pressures? Because church has been pressured to not say these things or to do things this way, but then they're looking more like the world. So how can they be bold? We've got ourselves being bold as well, but how can they be bold in doing their things as well in terms of how they impacts the world?
I think churches need to make sure they're teaching about these issues that our culture is facing. Like there's a big assisted suicide debate in the country, has been, will be still. Churches need to teach about that and say, this is what Christian, this is what the Bible perspective, this is what the perspective is. This same applies to abortion, where that's been debated as well. Same applies to Islam. People want to know about it, they want to understand it, they need to teach about it, talk about it and stuff. And same applies to transgenderism, LGBT stuff as well. Churches need to teach their people. If you're not teaching them, the world is teaching them. So you need to teach people about these things and equip them to stand up in the world and know what we think and know why we think it.
Of that. And lastly, what encouragement can you give to Christians about being courageous and getting involved in the public square in 2026 and beyond?
We need people with moral courage, and it doesn't take that many to change a nation. One lesson is, Luke, the whole LGBT lobby, what is it, 1.5%, 2% of the population identifies LGBT. They got such influence that they changed the definition of marriage, and they've got flags, trans flags over there in Regent Street today. Massive influence from just 2% of the population, right? Christians are bigger than that, right? And we've got the truth on our side, right? So we just need some moral courage and some assertiveness, and we can change the culture again. And that would be my encouragement. Stand up and make a difference.
And for people that are watching this, let's just say there are somebody who's LGBT watching this, what would you say to them? Because I think sometimes when they hear about these things. Think, oh, they want to do all these bad things, whatever. But ultimately, Jesus loves us all, right? We're all image bearers of God. So, what would you say to them as well? That might be like, oh, well, what does that mean ultimately for them?
Um, you need Jesus as much as I need Jesus.
Mm,
Everyone needs Jesus. If you accept Jesus' love and forgiveness and recognize that you've fallen short of his standards, he will come, he will meet you, he will transform you, he'll change you, he'll give you a real purpose and meaning in your life. That is what you need.
amen. Thanks so much, Tim. So, is there anything else you'd like to touch upon today?
No, that's good.
Amazing. Well,
Yep.
so tell us, how can people get how can people support Christian Concern? And
Yep.
what would you recommend they do if they may be in a challenging time? Should they reach out, or should they look at any particular guides that I have? Yeah.
So our website is called chrisconcern.com. I think if you go to chrisconcern.com/hello, you can sign up for our free weekly emails. It'd be great to have people doing that, hearing about our stories, learning about a Christian perspective on what's happening in the news and stuff like that. So love you to do that. Also follow us on X and on YouTube and Instagram, all those kind of places as well. Great to have more followers on those things and stuff. And what was your next question?
Yeah, I think it was yeah. If they need some support, for example, let's just say they've had a case.
Oh yeah, no,
individual
yeah.
case.
Call us up. There's a number on the website. If you're facing an issue in the workplace or something like that, the number's always open. Call us up, ask for some advice, and we'll help you.
So that's Christian Concern on social media. Tim Dieppe on social media. Is it X the best place to find you there?
Yeah, probably.
Yep.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Tim Dieppe, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you.